What is up, people? Welcome back to Night TV.
It's not that I don't want you here. Yeah. It's not the way you stare into my eyes.
I'm in my living room, and today's Death on the Dirt Road is going to be a story time. That's right, a story time. And this is going to be about the time I watched a white supremacist commit suicide.
He needs some milk.
No, it's not clickbait. This absolutely happened. So just sit back, relax, and tune in for this episode because it's about to get crazy. Side note, y'all, we had a snowstorm last night, and it's crazy outside. Like, it just looks so dreary and weepy, but I want to go out there so bad. But I know that people in the South don't know how to drive in this type of weather, so something is telling me to just sit my behind here and talk to y'all. So that's what I'm going to do. It's really melty outside. Like,
Boy, if you don't get...
all of it has melty. It's starting to melt, but it's still got some snow out there. I've seen people at the store near here. They were having like a snowball fight and everything. They were really scraping the snow off of my car like crazy people, but I digress. I'm just going to go ahead and get into the story. So the year is 2013. And a lot of you already know that I used to work at the prison. And before I got out of uniform, I was a CO. I was an officer first, and then I moved up to be a corporal. But what you may or may not know is that you don't always stay at the prison when you are a CO. Sometimes you have to do what's called hospital duty. And that's when you don't necessarily come to the institution. Sometimes you do come and they'll send you out if something happens. But for the most part, they'll call you early in the morning or right before your shift at night, and they'll tell you to report to the hospital. So that's what I did. Now, keep in mind that this was my first time going to the hospital. Now, my little curious behind, I wanted to go for a long time before this because I heard people talking about it, but I'm like, I want to see what this is all about. It can't be that bad. And maybe, just maybe, it'll be better than just sitting on a building and watching inmates all night.
Yeah, right.
Y'all, I was wrong. Another thing to note is, even though I worked with females, I was sitting on a man. So when you go to the hospital, you don't necessarily sit on the people that belong to your institution. If you work at a male institution such as Kirkland or Broad River, you could be sitting on an inmate from Camille Graham. Well, it's not a lot of female institutions in Columbia. It used to be two, Camille and Goodman Correctional Institution, but Goodman has since been transferred over to men, so now Camille is the only one in Columbia. I think the people at Leith usually go to Self Memorial Hospital, if I'm not mistaken. But if they're too bad off and they need 24-hour medical, then they would be transferred to Camille Graham. So that's how that works, okay? So I went and I was sitting with a veteran. She had been there many years before I was, and she knew the ropes. I didn't know the ropes, okay? They gave me the weapon. So you would have a person with a weapon and you would have a contact person, which means the person who could help the nurses and doctors with the inmate. Like, they could take off the handcuffs, put them on, all that different type of stuff. But if you have the weapon, you ought to stay far away from the inmate. So that's what I was doing. I was standing at the door when this man was placed into his room in the emergency room. Another thing is, like civilians, they don't usually put inmates out in the hallway for everybody to see. They try to get them into a room. I don't know if SCDC has a partnership with them. I'm guessing they do because we normally take them to that particular hospital. I'm not going to name it here just for privacy's sakes. If you know, you know. But they usually bring them there and they're able to get in immediately. And if they can't for any reason, they'll just put them in like a holding area. So fast forward, we get to his room in the emergency room, and we're told that he needs surgery. And y'all, for the life of me, I cannot remember this man's name. Like I said, this was back in 2013. And I'm usually good with their names, but I think it was like a trauma response that I did not internalize his information, because this really scared the living crap out of me after this man pulled what he pulled. But I was told that he committed like a series of murders in Santee, South Carolina, which is where I lived before I moved to Columbia. So of course I was intrigued. I have been Googling this man and Googling his crimes and everything, and I cannot find any information on it. But I know something happened at the Delta Motel back in like the late 80s, early 90s, and he was the person who had done it. So this man had a life sentence. Right off the bat, it's easy to notice that something is off with him. Both me and the other officer are Black females. he is a white supremacist, as I stated. And we were told that once we were given his face sheet, and that's just the information about the inmate, we were told that this man had some, preconceived notions about black people. All in all, he did not like them. So the officer that I was sitting with, she took real issue with this. Me, I'm like, okay, it is what it is. He don't have to like me. I don't have to like him. All he has to do is respect me. But her, no, she wasn't feeling that. So being that she was the contact person, she had to do everything for him because he's handcuffed to a bed. His foot is handcuffed. His arm is handcuffed. He can't do anything for himself. So every time he needs something, and he can't talk, by the way, because they have him intubated. So every time he needs something and she goes to give it to him, he like shakes his head. No, he doesn't want her to touch him. And that becomes more and more obvious as this story goes along, because this man literally put himself in harm's way just to avoid black people touching him. Meanwhile, I'm watching from the door. I'm watching everything that's going on. I'm seeing the nurses and the doctors coming in and out, and every white nurse or white doctor he's okay with. There was one black doctor, I believe she was a resident, and she was going to be the one who was going to perform his surgery. So, of course, he was not feeling that. And side note, I have seen this hospital do a lot of really shady things. Like, if they know that the inmates don't like a certain thing, they're going to do it anyway. Okay? Case in point, when a lot of them purposely hurt themselves to come to the hospital, I've seen them be mended with no anesthesia, no pain medicine. They won't give them a TV. Like, they just do a lot of inhumane things. And I know that these people are like the outcasts of society, but they are people, and I've watched as they just treat them as subhuman. And that's not always the case, because I've seen some really good doctors and nurses, but for the few who use their personal opinions to judge how they were going to treat the inmates, they really made it bad for them. In his case, I did not care. The only thing I was caring about was getting out of this place in one piece. I knew that they knew that he did not particularly care for black people. He hated them, if we're going to be honest, but it was all in the charts. Everything was there. I saw it. I know they saw it. And they had another doctor that could have operated on this man. But to be petty, they sent a black resident in there. And she was totally unprepared, as was I, because it was a bunch of people around her. It's an instructional hospital to boot. And they were telling her what to do, how to handle certain things. And then next thing I know, everybody just dispersed and she's left by herself. So the inmate is lying on the bed. The bed is going this way. The doctor is in front of him this way, because I think she has to do like some kind of stent or something to the effect. But he's on a ventilator at this point because he's having trouble breathing on his own. He was responsive, but he was not speaking. Like I said, only thing he could do was like blink his eyes and move his hands. And keep that in your back pocket, because that's going to be important. Remember, I told you guys, he's shackled by one wrist and one of his feet are shackled to the bed. So he can't really move. He only has the use of like the right hand and the right foot. So we're sitting there. I'm standing by the door. The other officer is at the end of the bed. The doctor is at the head of the bed, and he's just laid out. So I'm watching as all of this plays out. People are in and out. It's like they're keeping an eye to make sure that nothing is happening. I don't know if they discussed with her prior to her coming in there to
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
complete the surgery. I'm sorry, y'all. Prior to her coming in there to complete the surgery, I don't know if there was some type of discussion, but she looked nervous, and I was nervous because if this woman has no faith in what she's about to do, then how am I to have faith in what she's about to do? Couple that with the fact that we have to be present at all times. I don't care what they're getting done. I don't care if they're getting a brain surgery, having a baby. We have to be right there in the vicinity, and we have to watch all of this taking place, because that inmate is to remain in our custody at all times. Y'all, my neighbors really are having a snowball fight out there with this little liquid snow. It's not even hard anymore. Like, what are they doing? When I say these people have to stay in our custody, I mean even until they die. When they expire and they are taken down to the morgue, guess who's going with them? We are. Until they are placed on that cold slab and locked behind that door. they are to remain in our custody. So when I say that we have to be there for everything, just know we have to be there for everything. And so we were sitting there watching what she was doing. She was talking to him. She had her arms kind of like this over the bed, and he was not responding to anything she was saying. He was just seemingly in distress because he had this black woman, and she was a beautiful black woman, I must say. Like, and she was sitting there, she was trying to talk to him. He didn't care. It wasn't calming him. It was not turning down his anxiety. He did not want this woman touching him. So she tells him, we have to begin the surgery. You know, you have to do this. This is a life-saving measure. So if we don't get this done, you're basically going to expire. So he's just looking at her. And I know just by pure instinct that this man is not about to be cooperative. We have the other officer. She comes over to me and she says what I am thinking. She says, I know he is about to do something. I said, I know too. I should go ahead and call, hospital leadership and tell them what is going on. She like, no, we're going to wait. And I said, okay, like I said, she was the veteran. I was the rookie. So I was just following her lead. But she told me that she felt the way that I felt, basically, and she was just going to keep a sharp eye on him. So she went back to her place, and I'm standing at the door. I'm standing guard, got my weapon, my hand on my weapon like this, even though I know I'm not about to use it. But this is what they tell us to do, kind of guard it. You don't want anybody coming up behind you and taking it from you, because that has happened before, and that weapon has been discharged, which is the reason why SCDC officers now wear a different type of holster, because at one point they could just pull it out. Now you have to kind of go through a maneuvering mechanism. So the lead doctor comes in and he checks one more time, and she tells him everything is well. In my mind, I'm like, I don't think so, sir. I think you should stay here. And he is a white man. So to me, that kind of put a little bit less pressure on everybody, because you had 3 black females in the room alone with a huge white supremacist. And he was a big guy. He was not a small guy at all. So everything starts. She begins to give him kind of a sedative. It's not like a knockout drug or anything. She just gives him like a sedative in his IV to calm him. That did not work. Like I said, this was a huge man, and he was still aware. He was still alert. He did not want this woman touched. I cannot stress that enough. So as she begins to start the surgery, I see him moving his hand. So I advance toward him, and I forget that I can't really do anything because I have this weapon. So then the other officer comes around, and she tells him, look, you got to stay still. You are in a vulnerable position. If one thing goes wrong, you could die. He was not trying to hear her. He started really wiggling then. The doctor puts her hands up like this. I turn to look and see if there's anybody there that can help us. And at that point, like, the whole nursing station was empty. I think it was one lady, but she was tending to somebody else. So I felt like maybe I was a little premature in my assumption. Maybe he was just nervous. So I was going to give it a second. I came back and I stood in front of the door, and she proceeded to try again. By this point, my heart is beating fast because I'm really inexperienced at all of this, but I know things are about to go wrong. She goes and she tries to make her incision or whatever she was doing, because I'm not well versed in medical jargon or anything like that. But she goes and she tries to reach around. And at this point, he pulls the ventilator out of his mouth, and you see a bunch of bile come up. He just like spits up this brown stuff, and he just colds. So you hear a beeping sound, like, that sound where they flatline. And I'm like, oh my God. So I run in the hallway at this point, and I'm like, help, we need help in here. The doctor is kind of startled. The other officer is looking like, what the heck just happened? But this man flatlined in front of us because he would rather have died than have any black individual touching him. If I didn't know the depths of racism before that experience, I knew them then. There is no way that I would really commit suicide, do something that I know is going to kill me, just because someone who can save my life is not the right color. That blew me, and it threw me for a loop, because this man really he yanked it out, as a matter of fact. He yanked out the ventilator because he was intent on getting off of that bed, although he was shackled. And he was going to leave, like he was going to make it known, or I believe he wanted to speak, and he couldn't speak with that ventilator down his mouth. So once that bile came up, That man just went cold on the table, and I'm running, I'm scrambling, I'm looking for help. The doctor is she's panicky, but she's trying to remain professional and calm. But I know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that just like me, she had never seen anything like this before in her life. Once I go and look for help, you got a bunch of people, the same people that left her in the room by herself. They come rushing back in. They take a look, they assess the situation, and they're doing like chest compressions. They're taking turns. Everybody is doing a certain number of counts, and then they're passing it off to somebody else. There's a whole slew of them, and this is a small little emergency room. It's not even one of the full-size hospital rooms. So we're all crunched and crammed in there. But like I said, we can't go anywhere. We have to remain vigilant with that inmate. So I'm kind of stepping to the side so that people can come in. They're pushing his chest and pushing his chest. He was not responding. I remember so vividly that one of them opened his pupil and they shined a flashlight in, and that man's eyes did not respond. So I'm looking at her, she looking at me, I'm looking at the doctor looking at me, and we know that this man really just sat there and took his own life by way of ventilator because of what was around him. After about 20 to 25 minutes of working on him, our leaders had finally come downstairs because they had other officers and patients throughout the hospital, so they couldn't just spend all of their time in one room. So we really had to get a hold of them, get them down there, while the doctors and nurses, the whole team, were working on this man. After a while, they didn't really give up, but they stopped, and I think they got a pulse back for a moment. So they hurried up and they moved him up to the intensive care unit. We went up there. By this time, it was time for the next shift to start coming in, but we had to go with them to move him up to his new room because the transition takes a minute because you have to have the leaders who were with us to place everybody. So being that they were upstairs in their emergency room with us, they hadn't had time to place our replacements yet. So we go upstairs and we're looking at this and we're discussing it amongst ourselves. We cannot believe it. We get in the elevator with this corpse, because that's what it was, essentially. They did find a pulse, but he was not responsive. Like I said, they shined that light in his eye. He was not moving, but the only thing is they had a faint pulse, so they didn't pronounce him dead. So we had to go upstairs, and once we got there, the next shift finally came, and he survived throughout the night, but I believe like at about 3, 4 in the morning, I believe, if my memory serves me correct, they finally did pronounce him dead, and the coroner had to come and make the final pronunciation. So I am just shook at that point. I go back to work. I'm telling everybody what happened because in all of my years, my 27 years, I believe at that point, I had never seen anything like that. And I just could not believe the depravity of some people. I could not believe the gall and the gumption that some people possess, and that racism is that deeply rooted that this man would have risked life and limb to not be touched by a black person. And for a minute, I held on to some resentment for that hospital because I believed in my heart of hearts, and I still do, that they did that on purpose. There were several other individuals around. Now, to their credit, I don't believe that they thought that he would do something as drastic as he did, but there you have it. That's why you should never tempt fate, because this man really did the last thing that everybody was expecting him to do. So for a while, I held on to that resentment. I could see it in my dreams. I thought about it over and over and over, like almost nonstop for a long, long time, because I was not prepared for what I went to that hospital to see. And I understand that this man was a white supremacist. I understand that he had deeply rooted racism before you guys start all of that. I understand all of that. But it just, I don't know, maybe a part of me was still naive to the fact that people could just be that radical in their beliefs. I really wish I could remember that man's name, because I would look for all types of pictures of him, and if I could find any of them, I would insert it. It's just, I hadn't seen anything like it then, and I still haven't seen anything like it now. Have I sat on other dead bodies? Yes, I have. I have gone to the morgue on multiple occasions. I've done all of that, but still nothing has been as just long-lasting or had such an effect on me as my first time pulling hospital duty when I watched a white supremacist commit suicide. I did tell my captain, and while she didn't always make the best judgment calls, to her credit, she did allow me to not go to the hospital for a while so that I could kind of recollect and regroup, because she could tell that that had a profound effect on me. And while I've seen death many times working with the Department of Corrections, I've even come back to work after being off, and the girl that was in my office just the day prior, I came back and found out that she had committed suicide. And while that did stay with me, she was a white young lady as well. And while that did stay with me, it did not affect me the way that this man's death affected me, and for obvious reasons. But I'm going to get off of that. I hope you guys enjoyed this story time. This is my Death on a Dirt Road feature for this week. I'm sorry it wasn't longer. I will be getting back into Murder on the Move and Death on a Dirt Road more as the year goes along. But as I stated, we had a snowstorm, so I'm really not trying to go anywhere. I could have pulled up another inmate story, but I thought that you guys would enjoy this story time from my perspective and my point of view, since I was actually there. But let me know how you like it in the comments. And thank you for tuning into Night TV. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe and warm.